Hi guys, and welcome to the Percussion Revolver Series 1858 Remington. Okay, the 58 Remington has been around a long time. This is a sheriff's model made by Pieta. This is one we'll be using in this show. To talk about Remington, you have to start with Colt. Because when Sam Colt created the lock work that worked where whenever you would cock the hammer, it would automatically index the cylinder and lock the trigger in position. So upon firing and you recocked, it would all do it again for rapid fire in a revolver. Bang, bang, bang. Now there were many revolvers that were around at this time that may have done some combination of this. Some of them you would cock and it would automatically rotate the cylinder, but you still had to thumb cock a hammer separately. Or there were those that had extra finger triggers and things that you would pull this and it would rotate that, and then you pull this and it did that. So there was combinations. And a lot of it was legal mumbo jumbo. But you got to understand that at the time that this stuff was coming around, one, the percussion cap had really come into being what we call common use in the late 1820s. It had been designed earlier, but it just wasn't common yet. Flintlock was the way it was. And so most guns that you would encounter outside of the more urban areas were flintlock, by far. Flintlocks had been around for a couple of hundred years. And the average person, when you said a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun, you're talking about a flintlock. And so when the percussion cap started becoming a really viable alternative way to ignite a firearm, it was still kind of really a city thing. Yes, the mountain men utilized them, but they were getting supplied from the east, and you would get a big supply of caps. But even then, the vast majority of the guns were flintlock. When you do research looking at the mountain men of the 1820s, 1830s, and it really ended in the early 1840s, what we call the mountain man era, percussion guns were in the minority. They were big, expensive guns. The vast majority of the trade guns were still flintlock. So when Colt came on the scene in the early 1830s of designing a revolver that did all of these, and that was the Colt Patterson, it was so radically ahead of its time, really, for the time, that the average person didn't trust the new ignition system. You got to have those specific caps, and a flintlock worked with a hunk of flint and gunpowder and a frizzen. Any blacksmith could repair the lock work in it, but that percussion cap, and a lot of guys kind of shied away from it. And so Colt's first endeavor with the Patterson revolvers, Patterson shotguns, and Patterson rifle carbines were kind of a hard sell, especially with the idea of the revolving rifle and shotgun, that if you put your hand up here on the barrel in front of it and the gun chain fired, you lost a hand or it got badly imaged. It's kind of hard to be a resale market to stumpy individuals, you know what I mean? And so it just didn't work that good. And it was because of the Texas Rangers' success with the Patterson revolvers against enemy Native Americans. And the fact that Walker went and found Colt, and he had military backing and he had political backing and he had financial backing. Those three allowed him to find Colt and say, hey, we want to redo that gun and improve it. And that led to the Walker. Now is where we're beginning our story. Because Colt now had military backing, had a political backing, and had financial backing, but he didn't have a factory and he couldn't make it. So he had to go to Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney was an industrial manufacturer. He manufactured all kinds of things, and so he had a factory that had all the machinery, all the tooling, and the professional artisans that could work this equipment to get whatever you needed done in the proper amount of time and the proper way. And so that was the big, huge innovation. Now, Whitney could make anything, but the innovation of what are you making See, so he made things for other people en masse. And so Colt went to him and say, I have a contract, da da da, and here's the design, and that became the Colt Walker. Well, part of Colt's contract was the fact that he got the machinery, all the tools and jigs, was part of the deal, and he got to sell all the accoutrements. All that extra money, beyond just the initial 1,000 guns, well actually 1,100, allowed Colt to have the money, and he had the tooling, because remember that's part of the contract, he gets the tooling from Whitney. He was able to go move and set up his own factory. And so he went to producing the Dragoons, and then in the early 1850s, Colt began to produce the 1851 Navy. And of course, as you know, the Colt design looks like this. You've seen this in many of my videos. Now this is a 1860, but you understand the basic concept of the Colt design. Now Whitney, you know, by the late 1840s, and the Walker was 1847, you had 1849, the California Gold Rush, and a personal sidearm. The price of them was utterly, even by today's standard, mind-blowing ridiculous. You could buy a 51 Navy from Colt on the East Coast for about $12, $12 to $13. And then you could take it to California and sell it for $500. That's a huge, you know. And so Whitney said, you know, hey, we've got all this manufacturing capability. Didn't we make a couple of things? And Whitney came up with his own revolver. Now, it didn't use the Colt design, and it's sort of an oddball. But it was one that you had to cock, and then you pressed a button up on the top and allowed you to rotate the cylinder. The cylinder was enclosed inside. It was brass. And it didn't do very well. A couple of hundred were made. And then there was this gentleman that went to working with Whitney called Forsyth Beals. And Beals is the name you've never heard of, but Beals is the guy that made it happen. Okay. Beals was also an employee of Remington, and Whitney and Whitneyville Armory was making a lot of stuff for the U.S. government as well at this time. And so between the two of them, they came up with a revolver in the early 1850s called the Whitney revolver, and it looks like a, when you look at it, you don't think Spiller and Burr, which was a copy of it done later in the Civil War. It was a solid frame gun. It used Colt's type lock work, which had expired in the early 50s, late 50s, excuse me, so that whenever you cocked it, it would index, rotate, and lock, just like one of Colt's revolvers. But it was a solid frame, and etc. Now, Colt was also making a solid frame starting along this time that was the Colt Root revolver, which is you would cock the hammer back, it would rotate the cylinder lock, but it was an outside hammer. Think like rabbit ears on an old shotgun. It looked more like a musket lock than it did an inline like we think of today. And so you had the fixed frame gun of the Colt Root. You had the Whitney revolver. And these designs kept being improved, and then Beals, Forsyth Beals, left Whitney and went back to working with Remington and created the Remington Beals revolver. And that would eventually, with improvements, become the Remington Old Model. Now, the Civil War occurs, and Colt goes up to them, and he's got not only the 51 Navy, which is the 36 caliber, and many of the Army officers preferred the 36 over the 44, because the 44, prior to this time, was the big Dragoon, big heavy caliber, and they thought it was really a horse gun. It was too much for carrying on your side. They wanted a belt gun, so that was the 36 caliber. And so when they went, Colt went to the U.S. Army, the Army adopted the then new 1860 and the 51 Navy has issued and bought both of them. By 61, the improved 51, which had this type of fluid round barrel, we commonly call it the 1861 today, became the issue. So there was both a 36 caliber and this 44, but this 1860 Army 44 was by far the biggest one issued and bought by the government in the biggest numbers. But that's going to change because Remington, taking a 36 caliber, went to the Ordnance Board and said, hey, we make a real fine pistol too. And that was the Remington Bills, or the Remington commonly called Old Model. Now, a little something that they did, and I'll need to show this up close for you to understand. In the Old Model, that little notch right there in front of the cylinder where you can see those threads, that was solid. Also, they had made it, there was a clearance notch up under here. And what that meant was you could actually grab the pin and just slide it forward and drop the cylinder out and drop it in and slide back without having to take the loading lever down. And that was the Old Model. Well, they took a couple of them, they took them in the Ordnance Board, and they did testing. And after they had fired 600 rounds, they found them to be accurate, reliable, but they felt it was inferior to the Colt product. Not equal. Remington kind of argued this, that they were being biased, that those that were doing the testing just simply preferred the Colts. And so they asked for more testing. And at the end of the testing, the Remington was found to be fully the equal of the Colt. But they got, I think, a couple of thousand of that Old Model and issued in 61 to the Ordnance, to the Army, both in 36 and in 44 caliber. And they found that slide that pin forward, drop the cylinder out. I know what you're thinking. Man, if I did that, man, I could drop cylinders out. Yeah, but what they found was in real world, under recoil, that pin worked its way up and you'd be blazing away and suddenly the cylinder would fall out of the gun. Not too good in combat. Or it would jam up where the cylinder pin would get so far up the back end get loose and it would unlock. So because of that, they remodeled it. They did those cutouts I showed you up there to another problem with the Remingtons, was that big square frame and receiver right there. Was firing repeatedly in battle. The front of the face, between it, there's very tight tolerance right there, would get so fouled up the cylinder would drag. The other thing was that the base pin has no grease grooves in it whatever, and the base pin would get dry and that would bind up. So it was found that the Remington could outshoot, as far as accuracy, the Colt. But in extended fire, like in a battle, it got out of whack faster than a Colt because of that. Got to where the cylinder bound up, you have to hand turn it, bang, and hand turn it. You had to take it apart and clean it. You know, wipe that off and get that fouling off. And a lot of that fouling got so baked on, you just had to carve it off with a pocket knife. It was so hard. And this was kind of what worked against it. So Remington made the improvements. And that's what we call the New Model Army. Now, yes, Colt had the most numbers. However, it's also a fact that after 1861, there were no more orders for Colts. They quit taking Colts. They went to taking Remingtons. And so in the 62, 63, the vast majority, all the orders were for Remingtons, not for Colts. It's the Army is changing over to Remingtons from the Colts. Yes, the Colts are liked and loved, but the military was going to the Remington, and only the end of the war stopped that before they supplanted the numbers of the Colt. The last orders in 65 were for the Remington. They had canceled the Colts. They hadn't had no more bulk orders after 61. Now, of course, they're ordering it in 61. It may be actually delivered in 62 or 63. But the military placed no more orders with Colt for big orders after 61. All orders were for Remingtons. So that's one of those little things we don't think about. In the improved model, the 63, or the new model Army, and if you were back in the 1870s and you asked to see a Remington, there was the old Army and the new Army revolver. The new Army eliminated that pin slot, and so that the base pin stays held in place by the loading lever, and so it cannot walk forward. Those cutouts on either side of the frame were made to help alleviate some of that binding. The underside of the pin has got that deeper slot to hold a little bit of grease. We're going to show that whenever we do a breakdown and loading here in a little bit, to keep the cylinder from running dry and binding up. And that was a great improvement. With those improvements, the Remingtons were actually a better gun as far as accuracy, shooting reliability, at least equal to the Colt, if not the edge in accuracy. When the war was over and they allowed you to buy your arms, more people bought the Remingtons than the Colts. Colts became surplus guns everywhere, and so did Remington. And what really hurt Remington is they were such a huge production during the war. And then just as soon as the war was over and all those contracts dried up, Remington kind of fell flat on their face. They hadn't been doing in-depth development of new products like Colt did. And so the bored through cylinder was their only thing, and so they went and paid royalties to Smith & Wesson to convert Remingtons over to rimfire or over to centerfire, where you drop the cylinder in and out like we do in our cartridge conversions today. Later, these would be converted by gunsmiths to have cylinders that you could line up and load up and etc. But even then, that was kind of like the end of Remington as the big gun manufacturer. They brought out the 75 Remington. It did okay. It was never as good a seller as the Colt. And when they brought out the 1890, which was just a respin of the 1870 with a few other little tidbits, Remington just stopped being the big handgun manufacturer and stuck with military contract muskets and things was its bread and butter. Colt locked down basically the handgun market. Yes, there are other kind of handguns out there, but Colt became the hands-down winner in that competition, and Remington kind of lost. So the Remington Beals prior to the war, the Whitney prior to the war, the Remington Army, and the new model Army were all an offspin of Whitney and offspin of Forsyth Beals. You know, it was a good gun. It was a good design. It actually, in tests, showed itself to be the equal, if not superior, in accuracy to the Colt. Its fixed frame gave it that. The disadvantages it had was it would bind up here if you didn't do proper diligent maintenance between loads, and you had to make sure that base pin had some lubricant in it so that it wouldn't run dry. That was the big thing about the gun. Many and many of them were converted over to be cartridge firearms, to being 44s or whatever, having the barrels lined or coming up with heel-based bullets. And it was very common up until 1900 to still see people in working ranches, cattle, etc., carrying Remingtons in cartridge conversions. They just held up that well. Okay, that's the background and history of the Remington revolver. Many people today in modern times like the Remingtons, and I recommend the Remington as your first gun if you've never had one, because its solid frame and its sighting system is very similar to a modern gun, and so it's not that big a change for us when we pick one up to actually sight it. They have wide triggers which are more comfortable on the hand, and normally with a little bit of work can be just as good and reliable as any modern revolver as a field gun. Now, let's look at this gun in a detailed breakdown. Let's talk about the internal parts and how you can accurize it and improve your gun. Okay guys, now, this is my Pieta 58 Remington Sheriff's model, 44 caliber. Now, I have stripped the finish off of mine, as you can see, and antiqued it. Now let's talk about a few outward things you can tell just by looking at it. One, my front sight is actually been flattened on top, right there. As the gun comes, or as the Remingtons come, this is actually rounded over. This does not make a good front sight picture. Now historically that was correct. And if you look at a lot of the guns from the 1870s all the way up into the very early 1900s, you see you have this round front sight like a half a nickel up there. That's not a good sight. By the time of the 1930s, we had figured out how to get really good accuracy out of these guns, and special shooters like McGivern and things like that were advocating for the flat top front sight because it was a much more consistent sight for target work. So I have opted to flatten my front sight and slightly on the back side, the side facing me this way, undercut it a little bit to keep it in shadow. This keeps it from being a shiny spot and affecting my sights. In the actual rear sight, I've actually opened mine up just a little bit with a needle file, gone through it to square it up and make the sides nice and flat on the side, with the back being nice and square. This way, when I look through the sights, it looks like the sight of a modern gun. It's a standard partridge type sight, and therefore it's more in line with modern guns, that I'm used to shooting. And that's one of the reasons that I advocate the 58 Remington be a first cap and ball revolver, because shooting this, the sight picture and all is very much like a modern single action revolver. It's an easier transition than getting used to the small cone and pegs and things in a Colt. So we're going to talk about how we're going to field strip this gun all the way down, and little tips and tricks that you can do to accurize your gun. First thing we're going to talk about is how to drop the cylinder out. Very simple. Bring the gun back to the half cock position where the cylinder rotates. Now, putting your fingers on the far side, drop the loading lever down halfway, push the cylinder pin, and allow the cylinder to drop out of the gun. That's it. We'll talk about putting it back in a minute. Now, on the full size, not the Sheriff's model, this base pin can be taken out. On the Sheriff's model, you cannot. It's going to come up here and it's going to butt. When you take the screw out, it's going to butt against the front lever latch right there. But to take this out, the loading lever out, there's a screw right here in the top. I'll take that out right quick. Quite often whenever you get one of these guns brand new, it's going to be very difficult to break the screws out of them. They're almost glued in place. Okay, that is the loading lever assembly. It is pinned right there, and then pinned right here. Occasionally take this off and make sure you don't have a lot of fouling inside that little opening so that this works, because this is something that has to load. It should be a smooth operation. But if fouling gets up in there and rust starts to form, you can actually bend or break this little pin because you're bearing down and you're thinking it's just having a hard time pushing the round ball into the cylinder, but it's actually right here is the bind. So take that off occasionally, put it in a little hot water if you got to, clean it up, make sure you get a little lubricant in there, and keep it, functioning normally. Now, I'm a big fan of when I take a screw out that's unique, I put the screw back in if it's not going to block something. If this were a full size with the full 8-inch barrel, then this would come out. But as you can see, it will almost come out, but it hangs up. And I don't want to bend anything trying to get it out of there. So it will not quite come out. And don't take that out because that's a pressed in front peg. And if you grab a hold of it and twist it out, it probably will start falling out. You can't make it stay in place. So this is not a big deal. Okay? Now, hammer all the way down. I'm going to take that screw and put it back into position. Just run it down there snug. Okay. Now let's take the grips off. Now the grips, I got very lucky and mine fit very well all the way around. They're nice and snug. Okay. There isn't any gap or anything here. And here across the bottom, there isn't proud. It means one side isn't sticking up. It's a very smooth set. So I want to keep that fit. If yours are loose or whatever, that can be good, can be bad, but it's also, that can be kind of hard to get off. You're going to grab a hold of that screw in the grip, unscrew it, I'd say 5 or 6, see, let me give you a proper number there. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Come out about 5. Screw should be done, and just give it a light tap. That will push the grip off on the far side. Now reach through the hole and push out the other grip. Now mine's kind of snug in this. Sometimes I'll take it and take a blunt object and just lightly tap on the inside near this pin at the bottom corner there until it walks its way off. Now let us look at these grips for just a second. When you get your gun and you take your grips off, they'll be finished on the outside. Quite often they are not finished at all on the inside. This can be a bad thing. Now what I've done is taken them and sprayed the inside with a clear sealer, because if the grip is sealed on this side and not on this side and water gets in here, this can warp the grip, cause the grip to split, etc. So I want to seal this side. You can also rub wax into this. Plain old car wax works good, but some way protect it and keep it from swelling. Okay? You're going to see a series of holes in it. That's for other gun applications that this fits. But this one brass ferrule is what holds it. Stick the screw back in it. Give it a turn. Now these edges where they go into the frame are actually beveled. They're not round. And what that means in English is, let's put that screw in there better, is that here in the frame it's actually undercut. It's not flush. It's a slot that goes under. And the grip sits in there, and then you push it down here. When we do reassembly, I'll talk about that. But something I want you to be aware of now. Okay. Now, we're going to take the trigger guard off. My smaller screw tip. Okay. Right in front of the trigger guard, there's a small screw. Unhook it, bear down, turn. Gets almost out, stop, reach and grab it. Take it out, lift up and go forward with the trigger guard. Okay, just a simple piece of brass. That exposes you to the inside of the trigger group. Now you have a large screw right here. This is adjustable in tension. A lot of people doesn't realize that. Now let me get you a better look so you can see that big screw right there. It's designed to hold tension onto the trigger bolt spring, but you don't bottom it out blood tight. That's to allow the spring to get a little weak over time. So bring it down where it's snug and it's doing its job, but not so blood tight. That causes a lot of breaks in these springs because it's actually being overworked. They run it down blood tight and the spring is trying to do this, but it's actually overworking it. So don't tighten it that tight. And when we do reassemble, I'll show you how I tune mine. Put it right there, unscrew that screw. And one of these tool caddies, these little screw caddies, is a great thing for this. Keeps you from chasing this stuff all over the floor. And then we're going to lift out the trigger bolt spring. Now on the Colt, it's on 2 different screws, but on the Remington, it's only 1 right here. So we're going to take that free. Unscrew that. Slide it straight out. And now the trigger will come straight out. And give it a little bump. Reach up through the hole and push down. And you can get the bolt to come out. This is what locks your cylinder in place. Okay, now what's left in the gun is the hand, the hammer, and the mainspring. A lot of people don't get this. I've said in earlier videos that one of the great weaknesses of a cat and ball revolver that causes a lot of blow-by is weak mainspring. Well, Remington came up with an idea for that. And it's this screw right here in front of the trigger guard. That screw right there allows you to adjust the tension. A lot of people think you got to bottom it out. You don't. Alright, so I'm going to get up here. And I'm going to completely unscrew that. What that does is put tension on that mainspring. Alright, now there it is. I'm going to put it way over here because it's a unique screw. Now, it has lessened the tension on this spring considerably. It's still a little too snug to pull it out yet. What I'm going to do is, laying the gun down, I want to put something in here as a spacer to kind of hold it down and take a little tension off of my hammer. So I'm going to use the rammer assembly, and I'm going to take my thumb and just push it up in there like that, and so that takes all the pressure off the hammer. So use that rammer assembly inside the frame. Show you that up close. Right here's the mainspring. I'm going to take this part of the rammer assembly, slide it inside there so that it goes between the spring and the frame, and that will push down and take the tension off of the frame. Putting my thumb there and pulling it toward the frame, I can slide it up and into place, just like that. And it will kind of sit there, me holding it, okay? And that's taking most of the tension off that hammer. I will now unscrew the hammer screw. And the hammer can't come out yet because the bolt has to come out, the hand has to come out the bottom. There's the big screw. Now I'm going to release the pressure and I'm going to wiggle the hammer up. And that's going to take the pressure off of this mainspring. Now I can simply wiggle and bring that spring out by hand. You ain't got to pry it. You ain't got to beat it in there. I've seen a lot of guys hook it up there and have to use a hammer to nail it in. No. You take the screw out, you do the procedure I just did, and the spring will just come straight out without any damage to it. Now, you take the hammer and you push it straight back down. Wiggle it a little bit. It's going to protrude out the bottom of the frame, and now you can see the little screw that holds the hand to the hammer. Taking your little fine screwdriver, you will unscrew that screw. Now this is a unique one. So I like to take my fingers and pinch when it's almost top, because if it falls off and takes off, it is a nightmare to find that little thing. That is a teeny tiny screw. Okay, now grabbing the hammer, we just wiggle and it comes right out the top. Once it's out the top, I take that unique screw and I put it back in place to keep it from getting lost, because this is a tiny one. This would be a bad thing to lose, and that's one weakness of the Remington design, is that. Okay, now the hammer's back together. There is the hand, and that's what reaches up and indexes the slots in the back of the ratchet to rotate the cylinder. Here is your hammer, and here on the hammer there are two notches. The first notch is actually the half-cock notch when you pull it back, and you may be able to see it's a deep slot. Then below it there's a much shallower notch right there. That's your full cock notch. That's when it's all the way back ready to fire. This strange shape right here on the bolt, right there, that's the cam that causes the bolt in the gun to be tipped up, tipped down to open and release the cylinder. That cam right there on the hammer is what's tripping that and causing it to tip back or tip forward. Spring tension wants to hold it up. That cam pushes it down and let the cylinder rotate. Okay, now that we've got the gun and frame completely disassembled, okay, now things we can do to improve. We want to look into the frame slot in here. Look down there, and there's a lot of nice sharp corners. Take a needle file and get rid of those. Make it as rounded as possible. Inside the actual frame right here, that's the opening where the bolt comes up. Take a needle file and go around in there and make sure that there isn't any sharp edge. Also look at all your internal pieces, like the bolt, and make sure it's not rubbing. They're not scratches or something where you may have a burr in there in the milling process that's actually dragging. That can make for a very rough action. That can cause misfires and stuff because metal on metal is biting and binding up, and you pull the trigger and instead of it falling forward like fluid steel, it drags forward, or it hangs something at that minute when you go to cock. This is how parts get broke. Go through and find every place you can to try to polish and smooth out internally. Now there's one other trick I want to show you right quick before we start back on this reassembly. Okay. Now what we're going to talk about here is we've cleaned it up, we've got it all smooth and everything, but what about the actual forcing cone right there in the back of the barrel? That can be a real challenge because how do you get in there to do something to it? Well, there's actually a couple of ways. First, I'm going to take my fingertip and I'm going to slowly turn around and be careful, make sure it's not going to cut you. It could be sharp metal. But if it's rough, and it should be kind of cone shaped for the ball to leave the face of the chamber and actually land and then transition into the rifling. If it's too blunt, it kind of tears the ball up on impact and it hurts accuracy. So I want this to be smooth in this transition. I don't want to affect the rifling, but in this first 1/4 inch back here wouldn't be a big thing. The barrel's got plenty of room to grab it, but I want it to be smooth. Now what you can do is simply take, this one's undersized, but take a bore brush. Okay, so here's the little trick. You're going to take a bore brush and you're going to hold on to a cleaning rod. Okay, now you're going to hold the bore brush still and you're going to see which way you have to turn the rod to screw it onto the jag. In this case, it's going clockwise. Okay, so that would mean I would chuck this up into a drill and have it turning clockwise. Otherwise, it's just going to unscrew this jag. Okay. Now I would take this and I would wrap right here at the bottom edge a little bit of fine steel wool onto that jag. This one being like a 36 caliber, I would put a little bit of steel wool right there. I would then run it in the barrel, making sure it's like this coated, or put tape on it so it's not going to mar the inside of the barrel till it got in there. And then I would take and screw that tip in place. Hold it with my finger, turn the rod like that till it's screwed on. Now I would pull it in like that until it just started, and then I would spin it with steel wool and polish that forcing cone. See, I can do it that way. Not trying to pull it on down the barrel, but just pull it so it's engaging. And I want to polish that forcing cone with a little steel wool, get any burrs or whatever out of it, and make it a better place. Then I can push it back forward, grip hold of my clean jag, and unscrew the rod and slide it out. That way I can polish that forcing cone if it's a little rough. Now, to the credit of the modern manufacturers today, both Pieta and Uberti, I have not seen a truly rough one in a long time. But if you're out there dealing with guns that you pick up from friends or whatever, there's the possibility you can find an old one that's got just a rough, really rough right there. And I often suspect accuracy when I get a gun that's just not consistently grouping at all, it's just throwing them everywhere. That's one of the first things I look at is a forcing cone. Now it's the same forcing cone tool that's used for 45 Colts. But unless you want to spend $100 for a tool for a 5-minute job, or you have a gunsmith in your area that has that tool that's willing to do the job for you, a little steel wool and a drill bit and a cleaning rod and a small diameter bore brush seems to do just as good a job for me. But the rest is up to you. Okay, now let's talk about reassembly. Now one of the things I want to look at though is one of the weaknesses of the Remington is in lubrication. It has a small diameter right there base pin. Now what I've done to improve it on mine, the base pin is actually flat on bottom, round all the way around, and you're supposed to turn it upside down like this and take your finger and smear a little bit of lube on that flat spot, so that when you slide it like that and put the gun back in and slide it back out, that lube will be inside the cylinder. Okay. One thing you can do before starting shooting is you can run a small patch through there and lube that up. You can lube this rod up, and I doubt you can see it on the camera, but you may be able to. Right there, there's notches. I took a file and just put some notches along the edge of my base pin. That way, as it shoots and it gets hot, and that lubricant is melted down there by the firing, as the gun turns, it will wick more up on top of the pin, and it keeps my cylinder turning easier, so this gun doesn't bind up as quick. A lot of binding is because of fouling around the end of the barrel. That's the reason Remington milled it out, and you can see the expose the threads on the back of the barrel. That's the reason this is the 1863 model. The 1861 didn't have that, and they had a problem where this would get fouled up there and the cylinder would drag. And then the small base pin that didn't hold enough lubricant, in battles where these guys were shooting a lot, it would bind up. In matches where guys are trying to shoot at clay pigeons on a board, and it's every man for himself trying to bust it, Team A versus Team B, the guns would foul out. So this was a way to improve it by cutting down on the fouling building up on the front of the cylinder, the back of the barrel, and here at the base pin by putting a couple of notches on it, adding sufficient lubricant to it, and cleaning up that forcing cone. It shoots a lot longer before it binds up. Okay? At least in my experience. Alright, now let's reassemble. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take the hammer with that teeny little screw, remember, and we're going to take the hand, we're going to look at the hand, make sure it's lubricated, isn't still greasy, you know, and we're going to take the little teeny tiny screw out. I call it the uh-oh screw because when you drop it, it's uh-oh. I'm going to drop it down through the top of the frame so it comes down here below. Okay. Now I'm going to take the hand, I'm going to set the hand in position. I'm going to line up that little bitty screw hole, which can be tricky sometimes. I'm going to drop that teeny tiny screw in there. Often it's easier to just put it into the actual, once you get it in position, drop it into the hand and it'll kind of hold it so you can get a screwdriver on it. Now you try to line it up. Run it down good and snug. Don't over tighten it, just make it good and snug. Okay. Now we're going to bring it up into position, up high. Now the mainspring, I'm going to put it into position in there, and I'm going to put it into that slot. Okay. And I'm just going to push it in with my finger just like that. Fell in, no problem. Now I'm going to take that rammer, I'm going to come in from the back side. I'm going to push down to take the pressure off, just like that, and allow that hammer to drop down where I can drop the hammer screw in place. Now, you ain't quite done enough. Oh, there it is. Wiggle, wiggle, make it fit. There, went right in. Alright, run her down there, make her snug. Gently back off on the rammer. Now, before doing anything else, gently work the hammer. Make sure that little stirrup, there's a roller in the bottom of the hammer, is centered up on the frame. Give it a little wiggle, and then slowly pull back. Make sure it works. Okay, that lets me know everything's in good. If it's any kind of bind, and then you go and put the whole gun together and you go to cock it, it won't cock. You got to break it all the way back down to this point. So that way we know. Now that little bitty screw that goes in the front right there, I take it, Drop it in place and begin tightening it. Come on now. Sometimes this one can be a little fiddly to get it to start. Depends on how the threads are. There. Now I'm not going to run it down blood tight. I'm just going to run it down so it snugs up and then give it like a half more turn. That should be enough. Now what that was for in the Remington design was, as these springs in the original design grew weaker over time because it's forever under tension. The Colt is really more straight when the hammer's all the way down. This one's more of a curve, so it's always under tension. And so that tension would eventually fatigue the spring. It was so you could screw that spring in. If it got to where you wasn't having good ignition, you could tighten this up and make the hammer fall a little bit harder. So I make it where it just snugs up good. It didn't go like a half turn more. That's enough. Over time I may need to tighten that up as this spring goes. Okay, now I'm going to take the bolt. See this position, tab to the back. I'm going to drop the tab in the front, and then I'm going to just push it straight down into position next to the hammer. You'll hear it kind of click in place. And I'm going to take the trigger. I'm going to just slide it in, turn the gun sideways like this. I'm going to slide it in just like that. Now taking the trigger bolt spring, I'm going to drop it in. That will drop into where the, give a little wiggle, and it'll drop in where the trigger is. Sometimes you got to look in the hole and make sure you're not too deep in. Okay, that's all the way through. Now it's got to just go down here and line up on the bolt. Come on. There. Once it goes through the bolt, you're good. Just run her down to where she's good and snug. Now, holding the thumb against the trigger, holding the trigger forward, pull back on the hammer. Click, half cock. Click, full cock. Holding the hammer, touch it off. Do it again. Click, half cock, wiggle the hammer, it's all good. Click, full cock. Okay. That tells me that those are all in right alignment geometry. Now I'm going to take the trigger spring. I'm going to take the trigger has, just like the Colt, a short and a long tab. Okay. The long tab goes to the trigger, the short tab goes to the bolt. I'm going to set it on that shelf on the trigger, and then I'm going to push the top into the hole. It'll be a little bit too far down, we know that. I'm then going to take my thumb and scoot it up and just hold it in position. And now I take the big headed screw and drop into position. Taking my finger and give it a little turn to get it all started. Now, how tight do you run this down? Remember, I feel it snug up, and I'm going to go like a half turn more. Now, I cock it. But see, it's not quite causing that bolt to come up. So I'm going to take that screw, and I'm going to turn it around one more half turn. Now, here's a click. That's what I want to hear, click. Now I see where it's at, and I know last time that this side of the screw was pointing at 11 o'clock. I'm going to turn it on up. So that side of that screw, that slot, the top of it would be at like at the 11 o'clock position. That's where I had it before. Hear the clicks. That tells me it's all in position. Okay, now I take my trigger guard, I sit it in like this, lean forward, push it in position. Using my thumb to hold it, I now take the trigger guard screw, put it in position, tighten it up, Remington is faster to field strip all the way down because you ain't got to take all the frame screws apart than a Colt. Snug it up. Now that everything's in position, go back to your screws and give them that little extra, just a touch. Make sure everything's snugged up. Good position. Just like that. I want to look in the window and look at the bolt and make sure the bolt is dropping down. So when I go back to half cock, it should drop down below flush. My trigger should move forward. Full cock, the hammer should come back and the bolt should pop up. It's in fully position. Take your finger and kind of push on it, make sure it's locked in position. It is. Okay? Now, we're going to put the grips back on. I'm going to start with the far side, because on mine this is the tightest one. I'm going to put the top of the grip in first, okay? I'm just going to lay it up there. Look at the frame and make sure I'm not binding it or something, because mine's snug fitting. I don't want to pop it or break it, but I have to make sure that that front edge, which is beveled, goes into here first, okay? I'll set it up there, I'm going to wiggle it, make sure it's right, and then right here at the bottom, right over that pin, I'm going to put my thumb and gently push straight down. That should snug it up. I then give it a little wiggle. It should not come off. It should stay there, at least with mine. Now I take the other side, same job. I'm going to put it in. I'm just going to set it up there. I'm going to line it up, make sure front to back. I'm going to put my thumb up here and hold it in place here. And then right there over that pin, I take my thumb, hear it pop in position. Now my grips are going. My grips don't fall off, because I don't wear them out taking them on and off like that. I have a procedure for taking the grips out. Now, do not over tighten this screw. That's another thing. All this screw is keeping it snugged. Those alignment pins and the fit is what holds it in position. This just keeps it from moving from that position, okay? So I'm just going to snug it up good, like that. And I grab a hold of the grip and give a little sideways twist up and down. Everything's working. We're good. Now, let's put the loading lever back on. I'll take that screw out. Whoop, that could have been bad. Alright, now, this is all working. We've checked it. On this, there's a slot end on the loading rammer. And then there is on the other end this kind of biface rammer. That's the part that goes into the gun. This slot does not go into the gun. I know you can't do that. Trust me, somebody will try to do that. So, holding it like that, putting that cupped rammer into that slot. I slide it in, then I line up the hole in the hammer, the rammer. I look in the hole. I take that screw, wiggle it till it drops in the hole. Put a little action on it. Now make sure that's going to be a problem. See, I was about to mess up. This has to be further down. Okay, because the back of this is rounded and the slot begins. If you're not past that slot, you're actually binding between this and the frame and nothing's going to move. So make sure that the base pin is further down. Oh yes, when I was young and I had good eyes, woo, I could thread needles. Now, we're using the foil sluice. I know there's a slot in there somewhere. They snug that up, put it in, make sure it locks in place. Bring the hammer back to half cock. The bolt should drop down the rammer, pull that up, rotate from this side. Now, in the face, right there is that finger of the hand. The hand is going to grab those slots in the back and push it around. Okay? A lot of people fiddle around trying to have trouble loading a cylinder into one of these. What you want to do is drop it, pull it out of the way. You want to sit the cylinder on there, watch, and as soon as it drops down, it's going to hang up. It's hanging up on that finger of the hand. Twist it, and see it just drops in. Show you that again. Sit it in there square. It'll just sit there because that hand's keeping it from falling through. Now grab the cylinder and twist it this way, and you see it just drops in place. Now I can put that right in through the middle of it, close the hammer, and we're back to fully assembled, just like that. Okay, now while we're at this point, let's talk about safety notches just a minute. Because not all of these guns come with functioning safety notches. They're there, but they don't necessarily work. And let me talk about that right quick. On the back of the cylinder, you can see these marks. Those are the ratchets where the hand grabs it and turns the cylinder. It hooks into that notch and does that, turns it around. And then between the cylinder nipples, you have this notch that they call the safety notch. However, on mine it didn't work because, let me find the one I modified. There. Okay. As you can see, directly beneath this notch is this rounded part of that cylinder. My hammer on my particular Pieta, right here at the bottom, excuse me, find my place, right here at the bottom, this bottom corner of that hammer right there, when you went to put it down on the safety notch, it actually hit right there instead of sitting fully down. It was hitting there. And so on this particular one right here, I carved that notch down a little bit, and that allows the hammer to fully seat into that and go down far enough. Now there's two ways you could do this. One, you could take the bottom of that hammer and kind of grind up at an angle and make space. Don't go too deep. Half of that face is used for hitting the percussion cap. That bottom quarter is not. It's below it. Because you got to remember, see where that line is on it. When it would hit, it would actually, the nipples have a much deeper area, so the hammer sits further down. So what I did was just took a file, put it into that slot and did that, and took that shoulder off more, so it allows that bottom of that hammer to sit fully into that safety notch. So now I have on mine, one safety notch. I am not advocating that you should carry 6 and load it on a safety notch. However, in certain times at the range or whatever, I will load it 6 at the range and put it down on a safety notch. Now I rotate it around to that safety notch, and see there it locks. Hammer is fully down and it is locked. It won't turn. Now if I try to go into the next one right there, I can make it jump. See, that's sitting on the next hammer notch. It locked. It didn't lock. But if I come to this one right here, I can't. That's the one I modified. And I can twist all I want and I ain't going to get it to go. But that hammer is fully down. But that one right there, if I twist, I can make it jump. So that's when people say these ain't safe with the notches, because of the modern casting. The cylinder is actually, in the modern gun, just a grunt smaller. And so therefore that geometry is slightly off. But all you got to do is just simply take a file, get into that notch, and go follow the notch downhill and deepen it onto that lower shoulder and make your hammer fit down into it. It will not weaken the cylinder unless you go crazy with it, but it will make the hammer where you have the safety notches. I'm only ever going to carry it. I only need one safety notch, because that would be all 6, right? If I fire the first time, bang, well, that's my hammer down on an empty now. Boom. Only when I'm carrying this at the range doing 6-shot groups am I going to load it all 6. Any other time, it's hammer down on an empty. Hope you enjoyed this, guys. Any more questions on it, let me know. Okay, guys, now we're out at the range, so you're going to hear some shooting in the background. let's talk about shooting and what we can expect from a Remington revolver. Well, first, Remingtons do come in 36 and 44, and as I've said, this one is 44 caliber. The standard round ball is the ammunition I use mostly in it, and for this one it likes 4.54. Now whenever you get your gun, you need to find out whether it likes 4.51, 4.54, or extreme cases 4.57. Usually only Rugers take 4.57, but as sure as I say there is no such Remington, somebody's gonna have one. So I usually start with 4.51. Whenever I ram the ball in, does it cut a ring? If it does not cut a ring, then I suspect I need 4.54. Okay, that ring is important because it takes the sides of the ball and squeezes it and makes a flat spot all the way around that ball, so that when it engages the rifle in that flat spot, engages the rifle, and it becomes the rifling band. And so a slightly bigger ball like 4.54 will have a wider band and a bigger rifling engagement, so it would be more accurate. 4.57 would be even wider, but it would be much harder to load because it's harder to ram it down in there, see. And so I always just start with 4.51. I have a good supply of 4.51, 4.54, 4.57, and other ammunition. We're going to look at that in just a second. But I will take my brand new gun, cleaned it up and everything. I will take it out for its very first firing just to make sure it functions and everything. And I'm going to put a charge of about like 25 grains in it. Okay, a wonder wad, and then I'm going to put the ball up there and I'm going to ram the ball home. If I don't see a ring cut out, I'll just load one round. Fire it. Poof. Because you don't want chain fire, right? The common misconception is that all of these chambers are perfectly round. They are not. They're done with a device that's got like that comes down and hones and chambers them. Well, in that, creating the chambers, they're going to be slightly out of round. And you can see this if you will take the nipples out. You will load without any powder a ball into it all the way around and then hold it up to a real strong light. Do you see through the nipple hole any light coming around it? Or better, if you've got one of those really small pin light, real powerful LED pin lights that you can stick into the nipple hole and look into the chamber, do you see any light coming around the ball? Get in a dark room, turn out all the other lights and see. And usually there will be a little sliver of light. Not on everyone, but it's possible. And that's one of the things that causes chain fires, is the cylinders are not truly round. It'd be nice if they were, but most times in life they won't be. They'll be that slight out of round. And it's not a big deal. In fact, the modern guns are far better, far superior to what we had 20 years ago in this. I can remember guns from the 70s, they were so horribly out of round. If you did that bit of putting the ball in and putting the light behind them, and it looked like an egg, I'd have light on two sides where it was wallered out this way or whatever. Today, with the modern CNC machining, etc., this is rare, but not unheard of. So it's something that I don't check. I just start with a 4.51, go to 4.54, and I want a complete ring. A thicker ring is slightly better. Okay? Next, let's talk about the projectiles a second. Standard 4.54 round ball. Okay, you can get molds and create your own, or you can buy production made either way. On the other end is some sort of conical. Okay, now this is a Kato Ojama hunting conical, and this one is a 220 grain 45 caliber 4.57 diameter. Okay. Now, round ball is what I use for 95% of all my shooting with cap and ball revolvers. I don't want to waste good conicals on just target practice, because to me, conicals are like saying really good hollow points. They're a hunting bullet. I need that kind of horsepower, and just to poke a hole in a piece of paper, I don't need it. to poke a hole in a bunny or other small game, I don't need it. In fact, it's actually not really warranted or wanted. It makes too big a hole. On the other hand, if I'm going hog hunting, or I'm going someplace where I may have large canines and things like coyotes and things, or there's a rabies problem where I may encounter a large domestic dog that's very sick, or even something bigger, I want as much horsepower as I can in this. In that case, I'll load a conicals in there, okay? Now, how to determine whether or not your gun will accept the conical, okay? I'm going to do it unloaded. I'm going to hold it up there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the conical, and the one that's almost about going to the rammer, I'm going to sit it in there and see if I can wiggle it into position. And see, this one will not go in this Remington. It's too big. Okay, now for conicals. This is a Johnson & Dow conical 44. And what I want to do is, again, I want to take it and almost lined up. I want to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle and put it in place, and see, mine will go up underneath the rammer. Some of them will not. You will have to open up the frame right here at this shoulder where my fingertip is. It sticks out a bit much, and you got to round that off a little bit to make clearance for them to go in. But for mine, if I just cock it out just a little bit like that, I can actually sit it up there and then just wiggle with my finger, and it will go right underneath the rammer, just like that. And so all I got to do is I set it up there almost in the window and just give it a wiggle wiggle. You can see it goes right underneath. Now I've got enough clearance to do that with mine. Yeah, there's a little bit of a point there, and I really should round it off, but I can load it without it. I'm not going to be speed loading these. Now, I would not be putting these onto a paper cartridge and loading it without modifying it, because with a paper cartridge, you got to slide straight in because you got the powder. I'm going to be loading these on top of loose powder because this is a specialty bullet to me, and I'm going to be utilizing it whenever I need that kind of range or horsepower. Now, I mentioned range. That's because conicals carry much farther. And so if you're wanting to try a cap and ball revolver at 100 yards on a target like a steel gong, the Johnson Dow bullet is a very good choice because it's very aerodynamic, and the fact that it's got so much weight so it carries farther better, okay? And whenever I've tried to shoot one at long range, I usually go with conicals. I have tried cap and ball 36s with round ball out to 100 yards just to be fooling around, got a steel gong out there, you know, figuring out where to aim and etc. And it can be done, but it takes a lot of practice to shoot that kind of range. And it's really not practical. All that is a range exercise. I would never try to take small game or any kind of game with a cap and ball revolver at such ridiculous ranges. I would be utilizing them at bow archery range. Think 10, 15, 20 yards. You know, think archery. And whenever people, and several of you have sent me videos of where you've taken white-tailed deer and hog and stuff like that with your cap and ball out of a stand or something fairly close where the animal is passing it 10, 15 yards out. That can absolutely be done with proper shot placement and the right bullet. These guns can be used on game that size. But it just requires you to do your homework, learn what to do, and know where to place the bullet. But as said, round ball is the way to go for most of this, because the ball is not round when it comes out. We see the round ball whenever we take it out of the mold or out of the package, you know, and it's a nice round, you know, round ball. But when we put it in there and we shove it into the chamber, it stops being round and it kind of becomes marshmallow shaped. It's got a flat band going around it, and the top's pressed down and the bottom's pressed up. Okay, now the end of it is actually kind of flattened like a wad cutter, and when it comes out, it has more of a biscuit shape than it does a round ball shape, honestly. And that slug going down range impacts. Now the flat face of where we're ramming it is going to hit, much like on Kato on Jamas flat nose bullets. If you'll notice on okay, if you'll notice on that Kato Ojama bullets, flat nose. Elmer Keith and the Keith bullets had flat nose bullets like that, and they performed very, very well on game. And whenever you take a round ball and you squeeze it and force it and it's fired and everything else, what's coming and going down range is not a round ball. It's shaped kind of more like the top of that bullet actually in flight, because the bottom's been mashed, the top's been mashed, and the side's been arbitrated a little bit. On impact, it will change shape. Now, the round ball does not act like a hollow point. But, having said that, and having used cap and ball revolvers for 40 plus years, 45 years, shooting everything from hogs, dogs that were rabid, larger game that had to be put down for whatever reason. It was the gun I had on me at the time, and I had to utilize it. I didn't go looking for a fight, but I had to use this, right? I can tell you that it's much more effective than you think it should be, because that impact does flatten out, and it does make a bigger wound than you think it would. It doesn't penetrate deep, but it makes a bigger hole. And often if you put the bullet in the right place, it does the job very effectively. Okay. And I know somebody's going to ask me, can you shoot shot in it for snake loads? Yes. And I've demonstrated that in other videos, but in a nutshell, all you're going to do is you're going to take soda box, this is wax cardboard, and you're going to trace out small circles that are just big enough to fit in. Now, Blackie, where do you get those circles? The base of those Kato Ojama bullets, or a 45 caliber bullet, or get an empty like 45 ACP case, works fine. Put it on there, take a sharp pencil to go around, take a pair of scissors and cut cleanly, stay just outside that line, and make it. Now to load shot into one of these, I'm going to put a pre-measured powder load in here. For mine, I believe it's 28 grains. Yeah, 28 grains of Pyrodex. And then I put on the wad the 2 of those cardboard circles, push them down. I put the shot in there, take it over the rammer, and I ram it down. That squeezes everything tight. And then I lift the rammer back up and I put a single one of those cards over it and squeeze it down. That's the shot load in it. And that works very effective for snake at 0 to 10 feet, which is what I'm going to be using this for. It does not make a handgun into a shotgun. It makes it into an anti-snake load that's about 0 to 10 feet. If he's beyond 10 feet, I'm not going to worry about him. If it's right here, that's when I need to worry about him and utilize this. Now, just a brief word, the cartridge formers that are available from Guns of the Old West and etc. do make a good cartridge to be utilized inside your Remington. And I've made quite a few of those in the last couple of years now to utilize with my Remington. Paper cartridges are a fast, easy way to load, especially at the range. But you're kind of limited with the load, unless you make up a custom powder measure for it. But it's a good serviceable load. Now when you read up on your history, and you'll find out that back in the Civil War, that yes, they did issue paper cartridges for the Remingtons, the same one that went in the Colts. Well, they were hitting kind of like the average, and so it was, I want to say it was like 18 grains of powder and then the conical, or because conicals are what they were using, well, they're chamber capacity. And the problem with that is during the Civil War there were many different guns in 44 caliber in service, the Remingtons, the Colts, and a couple other things. And they had to kind of split the difference for size of cylinders, and so they had to make ammunition that would work in all of them. So it's not necessarily the best load. So don't go look up and say, oh, but the U.S. Army issued 18 grains, that's what I'm going to load. It'll be a okay middle of the ground load. It's not super powerful, but it's not super weak either. It's somewhere in the middle, and it can be an okay target load / shooting load. What was the military going for? Can I get it in the maximum amount of guns? A. B. Maximum conservation of powder. Powder was a premium. and see, is it good and serviceable for what I need, but not too powerful where it's wearing out the guns. That's what they were going for. Okay. Now, you've already gone over your gun. You've got everything set up, and now you're ready to shoot. So let's talk about loading. Guys, we're going to be using my pre-loaded tube. Now, I've mentioned this in other videos, but these are Dixie tubes. And what it is, it's a vinyl tube. I have a pre-measured powder charge in, a round ball, and I've then put a Wonder Wad in the top of it right there. So that's a contained cartridge for me to carry in the field. And I'll show you, all I gotta do is take my thumbnail and squeeze it, up pop the wad, squeeze it again, up pop the ball, pour the powder in, put the components in, and put that back in my pocket. I've had some of these 20 years. They last forever, and they can take a little rough handling in a pocket or whatever. And so unlike paper cartridges, which are very environmentally sensitive, these are not. And so that gives me a chance to carry these in the field, and this has become my favorite way to carry them in the field. Now, since we're about to start, we're going to lube it up like I said. Put it on half cock. I'm going to drop out. I'm going to take a bore size, slightly under bore size. I'm going to take a patch. It's got quite a bit of lubricant on it. I'm going to run it down the barrel. Make sure that barrel is well lubricated, taking off the excess. Yes. Alright, now the base pin. I'm going to take another one I got here that's got a wad in it. I'm going to put the base pin closed, turn it upside down because that pin's flat on the bottom, and that's where I'm going to wipe a little bit of that lube onto the bottom of that pin, just like that. I know it's messy, but your gun don't foul up, don't bind up if you do this. Now just press it down, get it damp, okay, like that. Now when I retract it in the frame, it's going to wipe off some of it. So I'm going to wipe off the excess on my finger and put it back on that patch. Now, drop, pull out, take my cylinder. As I showed, just set the cylinder in there. Now twist it toward me and it drops in place, just like that. Now I do just drop in my pin, there. Now we're ready to load. Now we take the Dixie tube. I take my thumbnail and I squeeze, and the wad on the top will pop up just like that. I take it out, I transfer it down here between my finger, my small finger and my next finger, hold it. I now take my thumb and I start squeezing, and up comes the round ball. I take out the round ball and I cup it right there in my hand. Now I've got a charge ready. I pick the one I'm going to load. I pour my powder charge into it, making sure that none's caked in there. It rarely ever happens, but you always check. Look. Take your knuckle, tap it to cause the powder to settle. Now I'm going to take that wad I got right there, roll it around my hand so I can pull it up. Now I got the wad. I put the wad on top of the powder. I set the ball on top of the powder, and wad rotate it underneath, send it home. And I leave that down. Now I go to the next one. Okay, I've got her loaded. Now before I start shooting, let's talk about sight picture for just a second. Now this is what I am seeing. This is my rear sight. This is the back of the frame. This is the slot where the hammer goes, okay? That little nub right there is what I want to see of the hammer. I want to see just a sliver of the hammer sitting in that notch at 0 to 10 yards because I want my sight to act for range. So I bury the front sight. I just want to see a sliver in there. That is 0 to 10 yards. Halfway across that is out to 25, and up here at the very top is out to 50 when I'm shooting at gongs or something big way out there. So by burying my front sight, it's point blank. I have adjusted everything, and in my earlier videos where I talked about how to sight in a gun, etc., I talked about how to rig up a sight like this. But that's the reason I've got it set up for 0 to 10 yards. Now, having said that, I'm still an old guy with poor eyesight, so don't laugh, okay? So I'm going to set up, and we're going to be shooting at 3 diamonds. I like diamonds. Let me show you diamonds. Here's our target. I've created 3 diamonds, 3 triangles. I like a nice narrow point when I'm trying to shoot sighting in a gun. And so it has been my experience that a round target is not that great for older eyes. You start drifting around. Bright orange is the worst because your eyes fatigue from it. Yes, you can see bright orange way out yonder, but your eyes fatigue very quickly looking at it. So I prefer the color blue actually for a long range target. Is a sort of a navy blue. I can see it much further out and be able to keep my eyes from getting tired. But I had drawn a triangle, and I'm going for this center triangle right here. I'm going to be at 5 yards because I'm old and I'm dang near blind, okay? Okay, here we go. Earplugs in, 5 shots. Well, it won't win any Olympic events, but I did hit it. First shot, getting used to the sights again. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, right there. So still, that was a, you know, about 1.5 inches with that flyer, and that's a flyer on my part. Just hatting shot, first shot today. So I went with that. The Remington can be a very accurate revolver. It's rugged, reliable. And as I said in my earlier history talk about it, the Remington, after 1863, the U.S. Army didn't order any more Colts. They were ordering Remingtons. And after the war, this became one of the most popular guns there was for cartridge conversions. As you know, they just changed the back of the cylinder, and a lot of 44 rimfire went into that. Now today we don't have 44 rimfire, but the 44 rimfire and the 44 Henry were pretty close in power to each other. And whenever they created the 44 Special, what was special about it? You used smokeless powder. And what was the ballistic equivalent to? 44 Russian. And what was 44 Russian the same as? 44 Henry. So that it was a very fine target round, and it was something that was used by a lot of different companies. They changed the name a little bit, but it was the same idea. And these Remingtons, a lot of them were converted over to these 44 rimfires because the rounds were everywhere. You know, they were used in the Henry rifles and the Model 66s, the yellow boys. And so being able to convert one of these over to it, a hollow base 44 caliber that would grip the rifle and go out with pretty good bit of accuracy, yeah, they worked well. Now, after you've shot and you've completed shooting whatever, you want to wipe the front of the cylinder, turning it and wiping it off. Now remember I lubed the bottom of that pin. I want to point the gun down, I want to give it a turn, because it's heated up, and that lube I want to go to the front because that's the dry spot there at the front, okay? So if I want lube to go anywhere, it's down here. The back of the cylinder isn't going to get, you know, dry. It's the front up here near the front. So that's what I want to do, is turn it like that to break it free. Okay? Now, the face of the hammer, wipe it off because fouling will build up in here from the cap and it blow back and all like that, and that will start jamming you up. If you'll simply wipe out of here about every 3rd cylinder and wipe the face about every cylinder, You'll shoot hundreds of rounds out of this before it ever fouls up, as long as you keep that pin good. Now, whenever it starts getting to where I go to cocking it, it drags, time to relube that pin. Pop it out, wipe it off, put a little more lube on it, slide it back in place. She's right back to functioning. Right here in the face of the cylinder against the frame, that's where fouling will build up. Now that's the reason, as you can see, that's the reason that they cut away the frame there to expose that, to cut down on that and put blow-by going forward instead of sideways, and caked up and fouled up and bound up, because there's hardly any cylinder gap on the Remington. And that's one of the things that makes it a more accurate piece, is because of that. We're going to load one conical just to do it for you. And yes, these Dixie tubes can carry a Johnson & Dow conical as well. Okay? You're going to squeeze out. Let me grab that other one. There it is. You're going to squeeze out and get out the wad. And then there's the hollow base. I put it nose first down. Get down here below it and start squeezing and working your way. And grab up here this lip and kind of stretch that lip out a little bit, because the vinyl kind of cups in above it. So if I just stretch it out a little bit and squeeze below it, it'll start walking its way up. Pretty easy. Well, not pretty easy, but you know what I mean. I got it at the top. Now I just start squeezing beneath it, just like that. And out comes one Johnson & Dow lubed and ready to go conical. I dry lube mine with liquid Alox so it doesn't contaminate the powder charge. Putting the hammer on the half cock, I pick the one that I'm going to load. I pour the powder in, squeeze the tube, look in the tube, make sure it all went in. It did. Use my knuckle to settle it. I found that makes it much more consistent in grouping. Put in the wad. Get over here close. I want to set the Johnson & Dow in it just like that. Make sure you can see this. And then I'm going to rotate, kind of push down my finger this way and rotate underneath it. Now I'm fully in and underneath it. Now I centered it up. And I sent it home. Now, the Bertie Remington rammers have a cup for conicals. The Piettas do not. Okay? And so, what it does, I think you can see, let me pop the cylinder out and I'll show you. It actually kind of flattens the tip of the bullet. Makes it look kind of like a Kato, don't it? Makes it a little bit like a flat-faced conical then. Performs fairly well. I've only shot 2 large animals with it, both cases where it was an animal that had to be euthanized. And both times it penetrated and did a very good job. Alright, let me cap it. Rotate around, put it on to the empty chamber beside of it, and let's shift up and see where she hits. I'll be going for the triangle on the left. 5 yards. Now you can see there's a whole lot more horsepower in that. The first one were my target loads. And usually, when I'm lubed up and my eyesight's doing pretty good, I can still group onto bunnies and stuff like that out at 25 yards. This more powerful load is for something big, like I spoke of earlier. Right there. That's about 1 inch high, which is not bad for my eyes at this time. I wish I could still step out here and show you these for the true accuracy of these guns. But to be honest, at my age, and I'm pushing 60, and the last year and a half my eyesight has gone bad pretty quickly, and it's got to where it's very difficult for me to see gun sights, and so I'm a lot of times using the force more than I am anything else, just to be honest with you. But I still feel confident with it out to like 20 yards with my good sights on a good day. I can still do it. If my eyesight's a blur, I can't see it, I don't even bother trying to go hunting because of that. So, the 58 Remington is by no means a poor choice of a field revolver. And it's my first recommendation for anyone that wants to get into cap and ball revolvers to start out with the 58 Remington. Actually a 63 new model Army, but we commonly call them 58 Remingtons because of a patent date. But the sight picture is so much like our modern that it's not that big a transition from a standard single action over to it, and that gives you a better chance. The Colts with their narrow rear side and the hammer and the cone or the blade up front can take a little bit more time to learn those, to shoot them well. And it's been my experience that the average Remington versus the average Colt, the Remington's going to outshoot it in accuracy. Its solid frame, its better sight picture gives it that. And lack of cap jams. Yes, it can cap jam, but not nearly as often as the Colt. And we've talked about it in the Colts, I had to limit that. But Remingtons are not known for that because of this window back here that when the camera comes, if it did stick, it wipes it off in that window out here in the frame and it falls out. So kudos to the Remington company. So take your gun, as I've said, break it down, get rid of any burrs, clean it up, flat top that front sight, make sure your back side is square and easy to see. If you need to put a file in there and widen it just a little bit so that your eyes can see it, go ahead. Deburr the hammer. Open up one of the safety notches so you do have a safety notch so you can use it at the range or whatever if you wish to. Learn how that screw down there can adjust in to make the hammer harder to pull and therefore a firmer fall. If you get too much blowback in here and this starts fouling, tighten that screw just a little bit so it holds the hammer against the cap a little tighter. Okay? The grips, if you've got a good tight fitting pair of grips like I do, be very careful when you take them off. Loosen the screw, give it a little tap, and get that far plate to come off, and then reach through and pop out the other one. Always sit them in place, lay them flat, and then grab where that pin is and squeeze it together and make sure it's seated properly. For cleaning, okay, you can drop the trigger guard off, take the grips off, take this off, and put it in some warm water and scrub it out that way without having to fully field clean it. I've done that a few times where I opened up all the internals that way and put it soaking in some hot water. Now how hot is hot? About coffee hot. It's something I can put my hand in and yeah, it's warm, but it's not burning me. So hot tap water, you know. A little bit of Dawn dishwashing liquid goes well. Scrub it out. Use water coming out of the tap, rinse it out, work it in the water, make sure all the fouling's out of it, dry it thoroughly. That's one of the reasons we use the hot water. Of course, run up and down the bore, run inside the chambers, and use a toothbrush to go around the nipples. And then set it and let it dry, and then oil everything up. Spray some good lubricant into the action and work the action thoroughly to make sure all that's coated on the inside. I do not use petroleum-based lube in the bore. That's the reason you saw me use bore butter in the bore, because petroleum-based lubes, whenever they burn with black powder, produce a hard fouling. I want a soft fouling that makes accuracy better. And that's about it. This is the short sheriff's model, full-length Army model with a full-length barrel. Can even be better for long-range accuracy, and you can get Remingtons with modern adjustable sights on them. And that might be your thing if you're looking for just a field revolver and want to accept the black powder challenge of using a black powder revolver as a field revolver. That might be a good choice. Hope you've enjoyed these videos, guys. Please leave any questions or comments below, and thank you very much for supporting my channel. Till next time, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.